time in 10 years, Allie, I not only have hope, today I have confidence that America is going to prevail and long endure. Today is another America time of testing. That time has come to us, our generation. And I believe that February 2026 will be remembered as the turning point in America. That could have tweeted the very same words that I tweeted. So basic was the proposition that under the Constitution of the United States of America, an incumbent president cannot ignore the will of the American people and attempt to overturn that election. But it was Mike Pence. And it's really the words before the entire world in that New York Times quote that we should focus on. Before the entire world, the President of the United States held that hour-long press conference in which he displayed spectacularly, yet again, his utter disrespect and contempt for the Constitution and for the Supreme Court of the United States in the plainest language, unequivocal language, frightening language to the world and to the American people. I believe that that press conference, not the Supreme Court's decision and not what could have been the president's response to that decision, any other world leader speaking of that country's Supreme Court in the way that the President of the United States did yesterday, it was vicious ad hominem. I mean, he called the court a disgrace. You know, he even went so far by the end of the press conference to say that the families of the justices who ruled against him.
So when I asked you last week about what to do for America, everybody, has a different way of doing this, but you did believe that at this point, voting is, as you said to me, voting is necessary but not sufficient. And when I said, what's the extra part?
This particular confluence of events over the past month has brought America to, and I believe beyond, the tipping point. And what has happened through all of American history when Americans have been brought to that tipping point and beyond? Well, we know it began with the founders of this great nation. They summoned the courage to dissent, to protest, if you will, and even to wage war against the tyranny that beset the founders at that time. Waged a war, the Revolutionary War, Allie, to secure the freedoms and liberties and the rights and the self-government that we have today embodied in the Constitution of the United States. And then thereafter, in the Civil War, same thing. Americans summoned up their courage to protest and dissent from injustice. And then so again in the 60s and 70s, led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Every moment in the past 250 years when America itself was at a crossroads, at a moment in which, as Abraham Lincoln said, America might no longer endure, Americans have risen. They've summoned the courage from within, from deep within, to dissent and protest against the evil, whether from within or from without, that we have come to the turning point, and that America and Americans are going to answer the call from our founders and ancestors to defend the United States of America.
The interview centers on a warning about what is described as a defining constitutional moment in the United States. Former federal appeals court judge J. Michael Luttig frames the current political climate as one of the country's historic times of testing, placing it alongside past national crises that challenged democratic institutions. Early in the discussion, Luttig points to his earlier intervention during the certification of the 2020 election. He explains that the constitutional duty of the vice president was limited to counting electoral votes, a position that supported Mike Pence during intense political pressure. The exchange emphasizes a core democratic principle, that election outcomes cannot be overturned by executive power. The conversation then shifts to recent tensions between the presidency and the judiciary. Following a Supreme Court ruling related to tariffs, Luttig argues that the president's response, particularly during a widely viewed press conference, reflected escalating conflict with constitutional limits and judicial authority. He suggests that the rhetoric used toward the court and individual justices could carry broader consequences for public trust and institutional stability. As the interview continues, the tone becomes more urgent. Luttig describes a pattern of confrontational language toward the federal judiciary, portraying it as part of an ongoing struggle over the rule of law. References to threats against judges and the personal impact on their families reinforce the emotional weight of the moment. The discussion expands beyond institutions to civic action. Luttig argues that participation in elections remains essential, but may not be sufficient on its own. He outlines a tradition of peaceful protest throughout American history, presenting public demonstration as a recurring response when citizens believe democratic norms are under strain. Recent events, including political controversies, policy disputes, and public demonstrations, are presented as converging pressures. According to Luttig, this convergence signals a tipping point similar to earlier periods when Americans mobilized in defense of rights and constitutional governance. By the interview's conclusion, the message returns to cautious optimism. While acknowledging division and uncertainty, Luttig expresses confidence that the country has reached a decisive moment. In his view, historical precedent suggests that civic engagement, institutional resilience, and public debate ultimately shape how such periods are resolved. The segment closes on that central idea, that moments of national testing are not only crises, but also turning points, moments when democratic systems are challenged, clarified, and ultimately defined by the response of the public.